the United States has slapped sanctions on 4 people believed to be financiers of the international terror group ISIS in Durban. In a statement, the Treasury Department says the men, 2 of them brothers, are part of an ISIS cell that's been providing technical, financial and material support to the group. Now, 8 companies linked to them have also been blacklisted. Washington says ISIS continues to present a threat across Africa. It says a United Nations Security Council report has highlighted how the group has used South African-based members to transfer funds from ISIS leadership to affiliates across the continent. All right, let's get a reaction now to this story, and we speak to the Human Security Program Analyst at Good Governance Africa, Stephen Buchanan-Clarke, who joins us via the virtual platform. Stephen, good morning to you, and thank you very much for your time. Firstly, let's start with whether or not South African authorities are alert to a so-called ISIS cell that is operating in Durban. Have they been aware of this, and what have they been doing about it?
Hi, Cole, and thank you for having me. Yes, South African security agencies are well aware of the ISIS cell operating in Durban. So the designation announced today by the U.S. Treasury, it identified 4 individuals as coming under their sanctions program, for which targets individuals and entities which look to support terrorism and their associated assets. So the 4 are Nufal and Yunus Akbar, who are part of an ISIS cell. One is described as an enforcer and the other a senior leader. And there are 2 other members also designated, Mohammed and Umar Akbar. And the latter 2 were arrested back in 2018 with Farhad Umar, who is also was designated earlier in the year by the U.S. Treasury as under their sanctions program for supporting terrorism, and who was arrested in association with an attack on a Shia mosque in Verulam, KZN, and the planting of a number of incendiary devices around commercial properties in Durban.
Yeah.
That case, the evidence on that case supports the conclusion that he was indeed operating a ISIS cell in Durban with a number of associates. 11 were arrested at the time. They were involved in kidnap for ransom and extortion activities, allegedly to fund ISIS operations, particularly in East Africa and Southern Africa as well. That case was subsequently dismissed. He was arrested again in March this year, along with some other associates, for possession of weapons and ammunition, and that case also was dismissed. So our security forces are working on that case, and they are well aware of the threat, I think, that terrorism poses to the country and our responsibility as a country to counter the global threat of terrorism.
Are you able to tell us, Stephen, where these individuals are right now in terms of their location? It's worrying already that 2 cases have now collapsed. Indeed,
that is a concern. And 2 pieces, I think, of important reports that were recently released. One is the United Nations Financial Action Task Force Mutual Evaluation Report in 2021, which looks to help countries engage in best practices around countering terrorism financing. And the report clearly shows that the number of prosecutions for terrorism financing in South Africa does not match with the threat profile, the risk profile of South Africa. And that risk profile is informed by things such as the extent of other transnational crimes in the area that terrorist organizations might use as funding source to support their operations, just an awareness of best practice when it comes to countering terrorism financing, and also things like our proximity on the continent as a travel hub, and large cash-based economy as well in the informal sector. So I think there is a bit of a mismatch between our enforcement on a broader counterterrorism front and the threat profile. And there definitely is need for an increased, political awareness and capacity building for our investigations team, strengthening perhaps of our Terrorism Act, the protection of constitutional democracy against terrorism and related activities, as well as training of investigators who understand the sort of latest trends in terrorism, recruitment, financing, etc.
Yeah. For the U.S. to make this information public, as they have done now, and it obviously takes us back to recent developments around their warning, again, that was published to say or to warn their citizens of possible attacks in Sandton, for example, and South African authorities, in fact, as high up as the president, voicing their discomfort as to the U.S. and how they ought to have followed certain protocol around this. Where am I going with this question? What does this mean for our relationship with the U.S. in how these warnings are constantly being put in public? Are South African citizens themselves in danger here?
Well, I think that's a very important case, and I think a lot can be taken away from it. So on October 26th, the U.S. Embassy released that warning of a potential terror attack targeting large gatherings in the Sandton area. Subsequently, the next day, we saw, as you mentioned, President Ramaphosa publicly talked about he was dissatisfied in the way it happened, and that the South African government was not properly consulted before the U.S. made this statement. And it was also criticized by the Hawks spokesperson, who said it disrupted an ongoing investigation into 19 members associated with the terrorist cell in the country. Also, our Deputy State Security Minister, Zizi Kodwa, said the U.S. government would not provide them with additional detail as to the nature of the threat, the targeting, the ideology behind the alleged terrorist attack. So the concern there, I think, is either there was a lack of coordination, or perhaps, which is, I think, more of a concern, is that there's a level of distrust between the U.S. government and our security cluster that is hampering the proper coordination. Of course, these are incredibly sensitive, drawn-out investigations, and having a high level of coordination between the U.S. and the SA government is incredibly important. I mean, there are frameworks like the mutual legal assistance framework and other protocols that should be followed in handling evidence and intelligence like this in a way that ultimately protects the people of the country, U.S. citizens in the country, of course, but doesn't disrupt ongoing investigations into these threats.
Stephen Buchanan-Clarke, let me thank you very much for your time. He's at the Good Governance Africa, the human security program there. All right.